In addition to the tube, the alimentary canal or gastrointestinal tract, there are also several other accessory organs that are involved in the digestive system. And so that includes your salivary glands up here, which secrete saliva, which does a number of things, moistening up food to make it mushier and easier to crunch up, making salivary amylase, which actually chemically breaks down starch, things like that, killing some bacteria, to your gallbladder, which stores bile, and your pancreas, which makes just a zillion enzymes that break down all sorts of different nutrients that we'll talk about, and your liver. And your liver makes bile. Your liver also does a lot of other things. To show you just a few, these are all just digestive and metabolic functions of the liver. So there's a lot going on, but let's start at the salivary glands. You have three main pairs, so 6 total glands, but 3 main pairs. And all saliva isn't exactly the same. They're all a little bit different from one another. You have sublingual salivary glands, which shockingly are below the tongue on either side. They produce a secretion that's pretty mucus, and it has a buffer and a lubricant. This is a small amount of your total saliva, about 5%. Submandibular salivary glands are lower than that, kind of below your mandible, as you might expect. They secrete some mucins, some buffers, but also salivary amylase, which, again, makes chemically breaks down starch, specifically amyloid starch, which is why it's called amylase. But all you need to know is that it breaks down starch. And it also makes some antibodies. Now, this doesn't make them, but it transports them into saliva to help protect you. This is the majority of your salivary secretion. And your parotid salivary glands also make a good chunk of your saliva, and they have lots and lots of salivary amylase. Those last two are what you start secreting, when you smell something delicious or when you start chewing. And they are promoted by your parasympathetic nervous division. That sublingual salivary gland, which produces like 5% of your mucus, is stimulated by your sympathetic nervous division. So this is why when you are nervous, you stop making most of your saliva. You make more of this saliva, but it's really mucusy, and it gives you that cotton mouth feel that you have. So this is a look at those, right? Your parotid salivary glands are up here, sublingual below your tongue, and submandibular below your mandible. Again, all 3 are paired. The saliva is mostly water, but and its job is to flush oral surfaces, keep them clean. It's to, if you've ever watched the hot dog eating contest, they take the hot dog out and eat it, but then they take the bun and they dip it in water so that it's mushy, so it's much easier to swallow. Your saliva kind of does that too. It also buffers your mouth to keep it about neutral. It has lysozymes and antibodies to fight bacteria. It does all kinds of different. Your liver has, again, lots of different functions. It's the largest organ in the inside of your body. It has 4 lobes. The 2 main lobes are a right lobe and the left lobe, which are exactly where you'd expect them to be in the front. At the bottom, you have a quadrate lobe by your gallbladder here, and a caudate lobe that's up here near your inferior vena cava. Back here, we're near your hepatic portal vein and your hepatic artery, and up here near your hepatic vein. You've also got this falciform ligament, which ends in a thickened area called the round ligament. This is what's left over from that umbilical vein that comes back. Right, we talked about that a little bit earlier on, but it sticks around here. Your liver, again, does a bunch of things. The gallbladder is specifically storing. In addition to being separated into lobes, your liver is also separated into lobules. And on the outside of each lobule, you have these groups of 3 vessels called the portal triad. There's a branch of the hepatic portal vein, which again brings nutrition-filled blood from the intestines. You have a branch of the hepatic artery, which brings in oxygenated blood. But you also have a bile duct, which is filling with bile that the liver itself is making. So this is what that looks like. So this here would be a lobule. They're like hexagonal, and in every corner you have a triad, right? A piece of the hepatic portal vein, a piece of the hepatic artery, and a piece of the bile duct, which comes from these ductules, which come from inside these lobules, and you can see this right here as it dumps into one of these bile ducts. And then in the middle, you have a piece of the actual hepatic vein. Remember, this is different from the hepatic portal vein, which carries nutrition-filled blood from the intestines to the liver. This carries all of the blood away from the liver and to your inferior vena cava. So blood shows up via the hepatic artery full of oxygen and the hepatic portal vein full of nutrients. And within there, your liver cells, which are called hepatocytes, right? Hepato means liver, are going to regulate nutrient levels. And then, there we go. You also have Kupffer cells, which are macrophages, which break down damaged blood cells and get rid of debris, and then it all dumps into that central vein, which will end up part of the hepatic vein proper. And you also have these bile canaliculi, and these are these tiny little channels. Canaliculi are tiny canals. You may remember this from bones last semester. Different anatomical structure, but using the same term to mean tiny little canals. These take the bile from these cells, they merge into these bile ductules, which these ductules dump into the bile ducts that are part of that portal triad that we talked about. So if you look at this, these are these little canaliculi dump into a ductule, which is too small to be a full duct, but it dumps into a full duct in the corner of each lobule. So your liver produces bile, and it comes out through the bile ducts into eventually a right hepatic duct and a left hepatic duct, which both carry bile away from the liver. Those come together, the right and left hepatic duct, into a common hepatic duct, right, which makes sense. They've come together into a common one. But it comes together with the cystic duct that comes from the gallbladder into a common bile duct, because you could be carrying bile from your liver or bile from your gallbladder. Right, this is a common bile duct. It dumps into your duodenum here. If you're not using it, it backs up, but it doesn't back up into the liver. It backs up into the gallbladder where it is stored. And then you can squeeze it out when you need it. Your pancreatic juices are also coming through your pancreatic duct, and they get dumped out this same little hole, which is this hepatopancreatic sphincter, or at least that's the muscle regulating this hole. So this is the pancreatic duct and the common bile duct. And when food gets here that's full of fat, you secrete CCK. CCK causes this to contract, and we squirt bile down here. We relax that hepatopancreatic sphincter, and what that does, that bile takes those big fat droplets which form because most of this is water, and water and oil don't mix, so the fat ends up in these giant clumps, and that's very little surface area for the lipase to digest. And so the bile, kind of like Dawn dish detergent, breaks it up into much smaller little droplets like this, and that allows the lipase to be a lot more effective in doing its job. Excuse me. The pancreas, really, it has two main jobs. One of them is endocrine, and we talked about that before, right? The pancreatic islets have cells that secrete glucagon and insulin to regulate blood sugar. But the rest of those cells, which we call acinar cells, are all there to secrete pancreatic juice, which is full of enzymes. It's also full of buffers, because the chyme coming from the stomach is very acidic, as you might expect. And so you want to neutralize that chyme, but it's full of all kinds of enzymes that we will talk about. And again, these are the acinar cells that we talked about briefly when we talked about the pancreas and the endocrine system, but we kind of ignored them, said we'll come back to them later. Well, now is later. So again, this is a look at the pancreas. And while the pancreatic islets here are endocrine, all of these other cells that kind of look like grapes, right, like sacks of grapes, that's what acinar means, those are creating digestive enzymes. What kind of digestive enzymes, I hear you asking through my computer? Well, pancreatic alpha amylase, which is a lot like the pancreatic or the salivary amylase that you make. In your mouth, it breaks down carbohydrates. You have pancreatic lipase, and lipase breaks down lipids. You also have nucleases, which break down RNA and DNA into nucleotides. And you have different proteolytic enzymes, which break down proteins. There are a couple of main ones, trypsin and chymotrypsin. I want you to know those, trypsin and chymotrypsin. And again, those are proteases. They break peptide bonds, much like pepsin does in the stomach, except this is going to continue that process on in the small intestine. Well, what can go wrong along the digestive tract? Well, let's start at the start. You can get periodontal disease. So this is why we brush our teeth when we don't, especially if we have a lot of sugar. Right? That sugar is key because the bacteria love it. Bacteria build up and they make these films which cover your teeth. That's what you're disrupting when you brush. And they digest those sugars and they produce acid, right? Lactic acid at the end, and that breaks down your enamel, and eventually you can break down your periodontal ligaments, which hold your teeth together in a gomophosis, if you remember that kind of fibrous joint from Biot 151, and you can lose your teeth. That's what's happening here. Mumps. Mumps is a virus that infects your salivary glands. So when you get your MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella, this is one of the things it protects you from. So you don't see it nearly as much anymore now that most people at least get vaccinated. This is what that looks like. Right? And then you can get inflammation of just about everything. Esophagitis is inflammation of the esophagus. It also often happens because of acid reflux, right, from the stomach back into the esophagus. This is essentially heartburn, but like happens all the time, right? So this is kind of what that looks like when you're looking at it through a scope. You can get inflammation of the liver. We call that hepatitis. There are different kinds of hepatitis. A, B, and C are all viral. So viruses cause this. You also can just have it from replacing essentially all of your liver cells with scar tissue because you've treated your liver badly because of drugs or alcohol. This can happen because of infection too. It doesn't have to be because of drugs or alcohol. That's usually it. And then jaundice, which is a buildup of bilirubin and causes yellowing of the skin. This is more of an indicator that this stuff is going on, right? If your liver is failing, you're going to get jaundice. This is what a liver that is undergoing cirrhosis looks like. You can get gallstones in your gallbladder when you get insoluble material that begins to bind together and form salts, and those salts are sort of rocky. This is an example of actual gallstones. People can go in there and kind of shoot them with a laser, break them up, or you pass them, or people, if it's very bad, can get their gallbladder removed. If you have cholecystitis, that's inflammation of the gallbladder. That can happen when gallstones block your ducts, or when you have some infection. Usually they will just take out your gallbladder. You also can have inflammation of the stomach, gastritis. Sometimes that can happen if you're taking too much aspirin, for instance, and or alcohol, sometimes together. It can happen because of bacterial infections that can break down the mucous membrane lining. That mucous membrane, that mucus lining, I should say, that protects your cells from the acid, when that breaks down, you can get a peptic ulcer, which is in your stomach. Gastric ulcer is the peptic ulcer in your stomach. You can also get ulcers in your intestines. Usually those are duodenal ulcers because past your duodenum it's not too acidic anymore. This is what that looks like. Usually that happens because you have a bacterial infection and the bacteria are going to break down that mucus. This is pancreatitis, inflammation of the pancreas due to infection. It's terrible and painful. You can also have enteritis or gastroenteritis, which is often due either to a pathogen like Giardia or maybe an autoimmune disease, right? Like ulcerative colitis. And then you can also have